5 days after. Ben and I left Flagstaff for Moab. We came home carrying red dust in our shoes and a notebook full of stars. The trip had been Adam's idea before he died, every summer. We followed the same plan he had written on the back of a park map. Short trails in the morning, cold sandwiches in the shade, and stargazing after dark. Ben recorded every constellation he recognized in a notebook. Orion, Cygnus, the Summer Triangle, for 5 days. I had been responsible for no one except my son. I had almost remembered what rest felt like. Bun unlocked the front door and ran inside before I had lifted the suitcase from the trunk. Then he stopped. He stood at the end of the hallway, one hand still holding the strap of his backpack, staring into his bedroom. Before we left, that room had been a piece of night sky held inside 4 walls. The paint was deep blue, plastic constellations glowed across the ceiling. Adam's hand-built bed sat beneath the window. A star map covered Ben's desk, and beside it stood the unfinished telescope Adam had designed for him. Now the walls were beige. The bed was gone. The desk was gone. The dresser, the star map, the shelves, the books, and the telescope were gone. A white crib stood in the corner where the telescope had been. A wooden name sign, still wrapped in clear plastic, leaned against the wall above it. Ben did not cry, not yet. Paige stepped out of the adjoining bathroom with one hand resting beneath her pregnant stomach. She looked tired, but not ashamed. "Don't make this bigger than it is," she said. "Families make room." My mother appeared behind her. Susan held a paint roller tray as calmly as if I had interrupted a household project we had all approved. "Bun can stay with you for a few weeks," she said. "Or use the sofa. Children adjust faster than adults." I looked at the pale square where his bed had protected the wall from sunlight. "Where are his things?" Paige exhaled. "I sold most of it. I needed money for the baby, the crib, the car seat. Clothes. You can replace kid furniture." Bon's fingers closed around the back of my shirt. "What about my telescope?" he asked. His voice was careful. "The one Dad and me were making?" Paige looked toward the kitchen. That was her answer. I knelt, zipped Ben's backpack, and told him we were going next door. I did not ask Paige to explain again. Explanations are useful only when someone believes the truth matters. Monique opened her door before I knocked twice. She took one look at Ben's face and moved aside. I told her only that his room had been emptied and asked whether he could stay with her for an hour. She crouched to his height and asked if he wanted hot chocolate or silence. "Silence," he said. I walked back home alone. First, I filmed the hallway and the entrance to the room. Then I recorded every wall, the crib, the unopened name sign, the fresh paint, and the rectangular dents in the carpet where Adam's bed had stood. I photographed the pale marks left by the dresser and the scratch near the window where the telescope base had always rested. Paige watched from the doorway. "What are you doing?" "Making a record." I told her not to remove another object from the house. Then I called the police non-emergency line. The officer who answered was polite. He asked whether Paige lived there, whether Susan had allowed her inside, and who owned the missing property. He said an officer could document the complaint, but the situation might require proof before anyone could determine whether it was a criminal matter or a family property dispute. I did not argue. I asked for the report number, wrote it on my hand, and repeated it back to him. That night, Ben slept at Monique's house. I returned to the empty room after Susan and Paige had gone quiet. The storage cabinet that had held Adam's compass, optical tools, and notebooks was missing, but its brass padlock lay inside the closet. It had not been cut, It had not been forced. Someone had opened it with a key. The spare key had always been kept in the kitchen junk drawer. I stood there holding that undamaged lock and understood the difference between panic and intention. No one had cleared this room in a desperate rush. Someone had searched for the key, opened the cabinet, examined each piece, and decided how much every memory was worth. Adam taught physics at Coconino High School and was known for turning lessons into things they could touch. He built pendulums from fishing line, demonstrated momentum with skateboards, and used old lenses to show how light bent before equations. At home, he gave that patience to Ben. The telescope began as a winter project when Ben was 4. Adam chose birch plywood for the base because it was strong but light. He ordered a custom optical mirror, measured every bracket by hand, and filled a black notebook with penciled sketches, angles, and corrections. It was a Dobsonian telescope, simple enough for a child to move but powerful enough, Adam promised, to show them Saturn's rings. "We'll use it on your 9th birthday," he told Ben. "You, me, and the biggest thermos of hot chocolate in Arizona." Ben had been 5 when Adam died. For months, neither of us touched the telescope. It stood beside the bedroom window beneath a cloth, where Adam had left it. Then, one Saturday, Ben pulled the cloth away and asked whether promises still counted when one person was gone. I told him they did. After that, we worked slowly. One bracket in February, sanding in March, a careful coat of sealant on a free weekend. We never rushed. The telescope was not only a project, it was how Ben and I kept moving toward a date Adam had chosen for us. I understood promises because I had spent my life keeping everyone else's. By 13, I was helping my mother sort overdue bills at the kitchen table. I watched Paige after school, worked weekends when I was old enough, and stayed quiet when my younger sister created problems somebody else would solve. Paige was sensitive, Paige was impulsive, Paige needed more patience. I was the one who never needed anyone to worry. My mother considered that praise. Families survive because the person with room makes room. Susan often said. For years, I mistook that sentence for kindness. When Paige became pregnant, her boyfriend left before the 2nd trimester. Their apartment lease was in his name, and once he stopped paying, she had to leave. I did not abandon her. I found a studio near a bus route and her prenatal clinic. I paid the deposit and first month's rent, signed as guarantor, and offered to help her apply for food assistance and a county program for expectant mothers. Paige still wanted my house. She said the studio was on the 2nd floor. It had no private washer or dryer. It was too small for a crib, changing table, and everything a baby required. She said carrying groceries upstairs would become impossible. She reminded me that Ben's room was on the ground floor beside a bathroom. I said no. Ben had already lost his father. I would not teach him that his remaining sense of safety could be reassigned because another adult found it convenient. 2 evenings before our Moab trip, I passed the kitchen and heard Susan speaking to Paige on the phone. "Once the crib is in there, Claire won't make a baby leave," she said. I assumed they meant the studio. Paige had discussed furniture deliveries all week. I thought my mother was being dramatic about a room I did not control. Standing in Ben's emptied bedroom 5 days later, I understood what "there" meant. After the police call, I opened the fireproof file box in my closet. When Adam died, the estate attorney asked me to document his personal property. I photographed tools, recorded serial numbers, saved receipts, and obtained a written valuation for his brass compass. Later, after several neighborhood homes were burglarized, I created a video inventory for our homeowner's insurance. I had photographs of Ben's room before we left. I had close images of the telescope, the custom mirror invoice, the compass record, Adam's tool case, Ben's wooden bed, and the school tablet purchased in my name. Then I opened Paige's marketplace profile. The listings appeared quietly. Children's bed, student desk, tablet, reset and ready, large star map, woodworking tools, antique brass compass, and near the bottom, DIY telescope parts, $25. I saved every photograph and timestamp. Some listings had gone live while Ben and I were driving toward Utah. Others had been created before we left Flagstaff. That detail changed the shape of the entire week. Near midnight, I found one more document in a photograph attached to the telescope listing. A folded receipt lay on the kitchen counter behind it. I enlarged the image until I could read the name of a small moving company. Its online customer portal showed a booking made 2 days before our trip. The service note contained one sentence: "Clear the entire child's room. My sister will be out of town." I read it 3 times. This was not a frightened pregnant woman making one reckless decision. This was a plan at the hospital. A chart had to let a stranger reconstruct what happened without trusting the person who wrote it. I treated Paige's sales the same way. I opened a spreadsheet and built columns for each missing item. Photograph before it disappeared, marketplace listing, posting time, buyer, listed price, reasonable value, and whether the property had been recovered. By the time I finished the first pass, the total estimated value was about $2,850. I printed the listings, labeled every screenshot, and saved copies in separate places. At work, incomplete records could hurt a child. At home, I had learned that incomplete records gave my family room to replace facts with whichever version made them feel kinder. Paige's payment app helped, but not as much as she seemed to believe. Her public activity showed names, dates, and cheerful notes like bike, desk, and star stuff. It did not show the full payment amounts. I used the names to contact buyers and asked 4 simple questions. What did you buy? How much did you pay? When did you collect it? Who handed it to you? Some people answered immediately. One woman confirmed the tablet and apologized before I had accused her of anything. 2 people never replied. A man who had bought the wooden bed said he would speak only to the police because he had paid in good faith and did not know which sister was telling the truth. I added every response to the file. The confirmations revealed how quickly the room had been dismantled. Buyers arrived across 3 days, within an hour of one another. Paige had not simply posted unwanted furniture and waited. She had coordinated pickups, accepted cash, and directed strangers through my hallway while Susan remained inside the house. The moving company was more useful. Once I provided the report number, the owner preserved the booking record and the messages attached to it. His crew had photographed the room before loading anything, partly to protect themselves from damage claims. The images showed Ben's bed, desk, telescope base, tool case, and storage cabinet still inside the house. Paige's messages were attached beneath them. "My sister is away," she had written. "The house is mine too. Clear everything from the child's room." That sentence mattered. It weakened the story. Susan had already begun telling relatives that Paige had merely helped her reorganize furniture inside a home where both daughters had equal standing. Detective Andrea Ruiz met me 3 days later in a small interview room at the Flagstaff police station. She did not praise my spreadsheet or promise me justice. She asked questions. Did Paige receive mail at my address? No. Did she pay rent? No. Did she have a bedroom there? No. Did she possess her own key? Not that I had given her. Had I ever authorized her to sell Ben's property or Adam's belongings? No. Did Susan have the legal or personal authority to decide what happened to property owned by Ben, Adam's estate, or me? No. I gave Ruiz the studio lease showing Paige's address, my deed, the estate inventory, and the insurance video. She reviewed the documents without rushing. "This is enough to investigate," she finally said. "It is not a promise that charges will be filed. We still have to establish who did what permission was claimed, and what the recoverable loss actually is." It was not the dramatic reassurance people expect in stories. It was better. It was accurate. Susan's account separated her from Paige, but it did not make her innocent. She admitted allowing Paige into the house. She admitted they planned to move Ben's bed and desk into the garage, place the crib in his room, and confront me with the arrangement after I returned. Susan believed I would be angry, then surrender rather than force a pregnant woman and newborn back into a studio. But she insisted she had forbidden Paige from touching Adam's cabinet, compass, notebooks, or telescope. Ruiz later showed me messages recovered from Susan's phone. "You can move the child's furniture," Susan had written, "but do not open Adam's cabinet. Claire will not notice what is missing if everything is finished before she gets home." Paige replied, "I am serious. Dead people do not need a memorial room." Susan had helped plan the occupation of Ben's room. Paige had used that help as cover, then crossed even the boundary her mother had tried to draw. Susan was not innocent. She had also been used by the daughter she was protecting. During her interview, Paige admitted selling the property. She simply rejected the word theft. "Claire has a house, a career, and money to replace things," she said. "My baby has nothing. The person who needs more should come first." Ruiz let the silence settle before asking one question. "Who gave you the right to decide that your sister's child needed less?" Paige did not answer. For the first week, Ben slept in my room on a folding mattress beside the wall. He said it was temporary, as if he were the adult reassuring me. Every morning, he rolled the blanket and placed his pillow beneath my desk. Then he lifted a blue backpack onto his shoulders and carried it from room to room. At breakfast, it hung from the back of his chair. While he watched television, it rested between his feet. At night, he placed it beside the front door. I finally asked what was inside. Ben unzipped it without complaint. He had packed a photograph of Adam, one t-shirt, a toothbrush, a wooden toy boat, and his star observation notebook. "Why do you carry all this?" He looked embarrassed by the question. "If we have to leave again, I won't let them take everything." The sentence was quiet. That made it worse. After that, I started noticing the smaller changes. Ben woke several times each night and checked the bedroom door before lying down again. He refused to leave his pencil case at school. When his teacher offered to display one of his drawings, he asked whether he could take it home every afternoon. 3 nights later, he wet the bed for the first time in years. I found him in the laundry room before dawn, trying to push the sheet into the washing machine. He had folded the wet part inward so I would not see it. "I can do it," he whispered. "You already have too much." I stood there holding the detergent and saw myself at 13, making my problems smaller so my mother would have room for Paige's. Ben was doing the same thing. He was turning fear into a task he could complete without bothering anyone. At school, the class received an assignment to draw a place where they felt safe. Ben drew a closed door with a blue backpack sitting outside it. Monique called me into her office that afternoon. As the school counselor, she had seen children respond to divorce, eviction, death, and loss. She did not diagnose Ben from one drawing. She said his behavior deserved attention before fear became a permanent routine. She helped me find a child therapist who worked with grief and disrupted attachment. During the second appointment, the therapist placed paper houses, furniture, and wooden figures on a table. She did not ask Ben to describe the theft. Instead, she asked him one question. What makes a room truly belong to you? Ben moved a bed away from the other figures. When people have to ask before they take something, I wrote that sentence down when we got home. It became the first rule for rebuilding his room. The sessions also forced me to examine my own choices. Paige was responsible for what she had done. Susan was responsible for opening the door and helping her. I would not absorb their guilt because I had been trained to carry things. But I had seen warning signs. I had considered changing the locks before our trip. I had noticed the pressure, the conversations, and Paige's interest in used furniture. I had done nothing because I did not want my mother to feel distrusted inside the house where she lived. I had protected Susan from discomfort before I protected Ben's boundary. I did not cause Paige's decision, I told myself. But I am responsible for repairing the door I allowed too many people to treat as if it had no lock. 2 days later, Hal Benton called. He was a retired science teacher who had purchased Adam's telescope adjustment tools. When I explained where they came from, he drove to my house carrying the box with both hands. I didn't know, he said. I offered him the money Paige had charged. He refused. Keep it for your boy. Before leaving, Hal opened the box and removed a folded sheet of graph paper he had found beneath the foam lining. Adam's handwriting covered it. There were measurements for the mirror angle, notes about alignment, and a sketch showing where each support should sit. At the bottom, Adam had written 3 words. Ben's first Saturn. I carried the paper to my room. Bun traced the handwriting with one finger, but did not smile at all. He asked whether we would ever find the telescope. I said I did not know, but we still had part of his father's plan. That night, after I turned off the lamp, Ben remained awake on the folding mattress. Mom? Yes? If I don't want Grandma in my new room, will she still love me? I could not answer quickly. My son was beginning to measure the price of love by how much of himself he was willing to surrender. When Susan learned that I was still cooperating with Detective Ruiz, she did not shout. She waited until breakfast, placed her coffee beside the sink, and announced that she would no longer pick Ben up from school or stay with him during my night shifts. I will not help a daughter who treats her own sister like a criminal, she said. The sentence was aimed at my schedule, not my conscience. For 2 years, Susan had covered 3 evenings each week while I worked at the hospital. That arrangement allowed me to keep the night differential, maintain my seniority, and avoid paying for late childcare by withdrawing it without warning. She was reminding me that every kindness she offered came with a condition. I could receive support only while I continued protecting the family system that made Paige untouchable. I met with my supervisor that afternoon and requested a transfer to day shift. She approved it, but the change cost me several $100s each month. I rebuilt my budget at the kitchen table, cutting subscriptions, delaying a car repair, and moving money from savings to childcare. Monique offered to collect Ben twice a week until I found something permanent. I thanked her without pretending I could manage everything alone. Accepting help from Monique felt unfamiliar, but it was different from owing obedience to someone who could withdraw care whenever challenged again. 3 days later, my doorbell camera sent an alert while I was driving home. Susan stood on the porch, holding the door open. Paige walked past her carrying 2 empty storage bins. 10 minutes later, the camera showed them again. One bin now held blankets. The other contained framed photographs and a small wooden box I recognized from the hallway cabinet. I arrived before Paige reached her car. She said she was collecting the rest of her things. "They are not your things," I said. Susan stepped between us and told me not to create another scene. I did not raise my voice. I asked Paige to put the bins down, leave the property, and arrange any future retrieval through me in writing. Then I saved the video in 3 separate locations and added the time to my case file. The next morning, a locksmith installed an electronic keypad system. Susan was still a lawful resident, so I did not lock her out. I gave her a personal code valid for exactly 30 days. It could not be shared, and every use sent a notification to my phone. At the same time, I served her written notice that her right to live in the house would end after those 30 days. She read the notice twice. "You are evicting your own mother. I am ending an arrangement you used to open my home so someone else could take Ben's property." Her face changed, but I did not take the paper back. I told her I would help pack, help apply for a prescription discount program, and pay for her essential medication during a 3-month transition. I would not continue paying her phone bill, car insurance, or the extra expenses I had been covering simply because no one else wanted to ask how much they cost me. Compassion did not require unlimited access. That evening, Jenna Hale sent me a private message. Jenna was our cousin, the kind of person who avoided family arguments so successfully that everyone called her peaceful. Her message contained one sentence. "This is not the first time Paige sold something that was not hers." 2 years earlier, Paige had taken our grandmother's sewing machine from storage and listed it online. It was an old black Singer with a worn wooden cabinet, the machine our grandmother had used to make school clothes for all of us. When Grandma discovered it was gone, the family called the sale a misunderstanding. Susan said Paige believed nobody wanted it. Deb persuaded Grandma not to involve the police. Several relatives contributed money for a replacement machine. Although Grandma never used the new one, Paige was never required to repay anyone. Jenna attached a screenshot of the old listing. The description read, "Vintage sewing machine, clearing family clutter." I stared at the phrase for a long time. Paige's pregnancy had not created this behavior. It had provided a new justification for a pattern our family had protected for years. Every time Paige crossed a line, someone renamed the act, replaced the object, paid the bill, and asked the injured person to preserve the peace. She had learned that consequences were another family expense. Near midnight, Susan knocked on my bedroom door. She carried 2 cups of tea. For a moment, she looked less angry than tired. "Do you want to know why I always say families have to make room?" she asked. Before I answered, she removed the inexpensive ring she always wore and placed it on my bedside table. Susan turned the inexpensive ring between 2 fingers before she began. "In 1989, I had been married 8 months, she said. Your Uncle Ray borrowed a car he had no right to drive. He was arrested before sunrise, and the family needed bail money by noon." My grandmother did not ask Susan for help. She entered Susan's bedroom while she was at work, opened the dresser, took her real wedding ring, and sold it to a pawn shop. Susan learned what had happened at dinner. When I cried, my mother told me, "You have a husband. Your brother has no one. Families have to make room for the person who needs more." She looked at the cheap replacement on my bedside table. "I cried one night," she said. After that, I decided she was right. She had repeated the lesson until it sounded like character instead of injury. A good daughter. Daughter sacrificed. Objects were replaceable. Need mattered more than ownership. Complaining meant you valued things over people. Susan had carried those rules for decades and called them strength. She even sounded proud when she said she had never asked where the ring went or demanded repayment. I did not laugh at her. I did not tell her she should have known better at 24. I could see how badly she needed the loss to mean something. You survived what she did, I said. But surviving it did not make it right. Susan's face tightened. If I admit it was wrong, then I lost my wedding ring for no reason. There it was. She was not only defending Paige, she was defending the meaning she had been forced to build around her own pain. If the rule was cruel, then the night she stopped crying had not been maturity. It had been surrender. Susan lifted one cup of tea but did not drink. "Bun will adjust," she said. "You adjusted. You became responsible. You learned not to fall apart every time life took something." I did not adjust. The answer came before I could soften it. I learned to disappear before anyone had to ask. Susan stared at me. I told her what being the strong daughter had actually meant. I learned to hide what I wanted. I learned that Paige's emergencies entered the room before my needs did. I learned to solve problems quietly so nobody had to feel guilty for creating them. What Susan remembered as maturity had often been a child making herself smaller. "Bun does not have to repeat the way you survived," I said. "He does not have to prove he loves us by losing things. I will not teach him that when an adult needs more, he has to disappear." For the first time that night, Susan looked uncertain rather than angry. "What am I supposed to do with all the years I believed this?" "You can begin by not handing it to Ben." She did not apologize. She did not say I was right. She collected both cups, slid the inexpensive ring back onto her finger, and left my room without closing the door completely. By breakfast, the uncertainty was gone. I heard her speaking to Deb from the sunroom, saying I had chosen furniture and old keepsakes over my own family. Change did not arrive because I had found the perfect sentence. Susan had spent too many years building a life around her rule to abandon it after one conversation. Still, she had asked the question. That mattered, even if it was not enough. A small crack is not a doorway, but it is proof that even a wall can move. 2 days later, the county attorney's office called. The prosecutor explained that Paige had no prior convictions. The case involved no violence, and she was expecting a child. If she genuinely accepted responsibility, she might qualify for a resolution that avoided jail and offered a path toward a reduced record after counseling, restitution, and successful supervision. My opinion would be heard, but it would not control the case. The state, not I, would decide what charges or agreement were appropriate before I had even received the written proposal. Relatives began calling. They wanted me to sign a letter supporting Paige. They said one signature could prevent the baby from beginning life with a mother carrying a felony. They promised Paige would apologize. They said Susan was willing to forget everything if I stopped pushing. No one asked what Ben needed in order to feel safe again. That evening, Deb called with an invitation. She had reserved the community room behind her church for Sunday afternoon. She said the whole family would attend, and we would discuss the letter together. "No one is leaving until this family is whole again," she said. I agreed to go, but Ben would not be in that room. The church community room was less dramatic than Deb had made it sound. Folding chairs formed an uneven circle beneath fluorescent lights. Paper cups sat beside a cardboard tray of store-bought cookies. From the gym on the other side of the wall came the squeak of sneakers and the hollow thump of children playing basketball. There was no long table, no assigned seating, and no single family voice. Some relatives defended Paige because she was pregnant and alone. Others admitted she had been wrong but said a felony could follow her for years. A few stayed quiet, watching Susan and Deb before deciding whether to speak. Uncle Martin said Paige should repay every dollar. Aunt Lisa asked why Susan believed she had any authority to give away Ben's room. Deb interrupted whenever the discussion moved too far from reconciliation. She kept saying the purpose was to make the family whole, as though wholeness were something we could vote into existence before the coffee cooled. Paige sat across from me with both hands folded over her stomach. She had prepared herself carefully. Her hair was curled, her voice was soft. "I'm sorry you felt betrayed," she said. I waited. "What are you sorry for doing?" The room became quieter. Paige looked at Deb, then Susan, before answering me. She said she had panicked. Her boyfriend was gone. Her bank account was nearly empty. She had no partner, no secure home, and a baby arriving in weeks. She said she had only wanted to prepare. Those things were true. They were not an answer. Deb began to explain that frightened people made poor decisions. But I opened the folder on my lap. Detective Ruiz had helped confirm how the sale money had been used. Part of it paid for the crib. Part paid for a car seat. Another portion went toward an overdue personal loan. Paige had also purchased a new phone after her old service was canceled. $85 paid for a maternity photography session. I did not criticize her for wanting photographs of her pregnancy. I understood wanting proof that a difficult season had contained something beautiful. But beauty purchased with Ben's belongings did not become necessary because Paige wanted it badly. "So we can stop saying everything in his room became diapers and formula," I said. Uncle Martin looked down. Aunt Lisa folded her arms. One cousin who had defended Paige stopped speaking. Paige said I was humiliating her. "I am correcting the story," I replied. That was when Jenna stood. She looked terrified, which made what she did next matter more. She held up her phone and displayed the old marketplace listing for Grandma's sewing machine. "I should have said something 2 years ago," Jenna said. "I knew Paige sold it. I stayed quiet because everyone said Grandma would recover faster if we did not fight." Susan told her that incident had nothing to do with this one. Jenna shook her head. "This did not start because Paige got pregnant. We just keep finding a new reason not to call it what it is." The room changed. Not everyone moved to my side. Some still believed criminal charges were too severe, but the idea that Paige had made one desperate mistake no longer held the room together. Susan rose from her chair. She said she would tell the police and prosecutor that she had authorized everything. She would accept responsibility for the room, the sales, and the missing property. If someone needed a record, she said, they could put it on her instead of Paige. For a moment, I saw the ring on my bedside table. One person would sacrifice herself. The person who made the choices would learn nothing. Everyone else would call the sacrifice love and return to dinner. "No," I said. "You may tell the truth about what you allowed. You will not lie about what Paige did." Susan's face hardened. "I told Deb I would give my position directly to the prosecutor's office. I would not sign anything in that room. And I would not negotiate with relatives acting as messengers." Then I left. That night, Ben sat beside me on the couch while I folded laundry. He had heard enough words like court, charges, and jail to understand that something serious might happen. "If Aunt Paige goes to jail," he asked, "will the baby lose her mom?" I said it was possible, although no decision had been made. Bun thought for a long time. "Is there a way she has to tell the truth?" he asked. "But the baby still gets to have a mom?" Until then, I had been thinking about justice as a line between punishment and forgiveness. My son had just shown me a third direction without erasing what happened. I wrote my statement at the kitchen table after Ben went to sleep. I did not write that Paige was cruel, selfish, or heartless. Adjectives could be argued with. Facts were harder to move. I wrote that Ben's room had been emptied during the 5 days we were away. Several listings had been prepared before our trip. Adam's locked cabinet had been opened with a key. Ben now slept beside a packed backpack and checked doors at night. Paige had admitted selling property that did not belong to her. Susan had allowed Paige into the house, but she did not own Ben's belongings or Adam's estate. At the bottom, I added one sentence. I am not asking for the harshest punishment. I am asking that this not be rewritten as a misunderstanding. The prosecutor met with me 2 mornings later. Detective Ruiz attended, along with a victim advocate who explained each document before I signed anything. The prosecutor was direct. His office, not I, would decide how the case moved forward. My opinion mattered, but I could not personally withdraw the charges or make the case disappear. A negotiated plea could avoid jail while still requiring Paige to accept legal responsibility. Ben's question remained with me. I did not want another child to lose a mother if accountability could be created another way. I also would not teach Ben that compassion required erasing the truth. I asked for 5 conditions Paige had to state, in her own words, that she knowingly sold property that was not hers. Restitution had to reflect the remaining economic loss after subtracting the value of anything recovered. She had to attend counseling. She could not be alone with Ben unless I later agreed. She could not contact me through relatives, pressure Ben, or use family members to negotiate around the court. I am not asking for jail, I said, but I will not support a document that calls this confusion. The initial charge was negotiated to a lower level available for a first-time, nonviolent offender. Paige entered a guilty plea. The agreement imposed 3 years of probation, mandatory counseling, and $2,250 in restitution, payable at no less than $75 each month. She was prohibited from unsupervised contact with Ben. The amount was lower than the original estimate because the prosecutor excluded property already returned and counted only replacement costs, repair expenses, and items still missing. That mattered to me. Accountability should be exact, or it becomes another version of revenge. If she completed every condition, paid the restitution, and avoided further trouble, she could later ask the court to reduce how the conviction appeared on her record. The judge asked whether Paige understood. She said yes. There was no dramatic speech, no applause, and no moment when everyone suddenly agreed on the meaning of family. As we left, Paige passed close enough for only me to hear. "You are not my sister anymore." I did not answer. I did not need to win one final argument. What mattered had already been entered into the record. Susan moved out at the end of her 30 days. I packed boxes with her, wrapped her dishes, drove her belongings to Deb's house, and arranged her medications on the dresser in the order she preferred. I helped complete the prescription assistance application and wrote down the dates of her upcoming appointments. She never gave me a complete apology. At the front door, she placed her old key on the entry table. "That lock does not work anymore," I said. She looked at the key, then at me, as though she understood that I was not speaking only about metal. At 12:01 that night, the keypad application displayed a quiet notification. "Susan Hale, access expired. I felt no victory." I sat in the dark hallway and listened to Ben breathing in the room beside mine. The house sounded empty, but it also sounded protected. Paige's first restitution payment arrived 3 weeks later. $75 was not enough to replace a childhood. It was enough to begin one small repair. Ben and I used it toward a locking display cabinet for Adam's star notebooks, brass compass, and the telescope parts Hal had returned. Bun chose the cabinet's code himself. I did not ask what it was. The cabinet stood inside his unfinished room, surrounded by paint samples and boxes, for the first time since we returned from Moab. Ben placed something important inside the house without carrying it back to my bedroom that night. The next afternoon, Hal called. I had enlarged the photograph from Paige's telescope listing. In the glass of the storm door behind her, he had found the reflection of a faded copper truck. On its rear window was half of a decal from the Northern Arizona Astronomy Club. Hal recognized the truck. "I do not know whether the telescope is still intact," he said, "but I know someone who may know where it went." Hal contacted the Northern Arizona Astronomy Club that evening. By the next afternoon, a member recognized the faded copper truck. It belonged to Ellis Warren, who bought unusual objects for vacation rentals near Flagstaff. Ellis had purchased the telescope for $25 because he thought the birch base could become a lampstand. The tube might decorate a reading room, and the wooden box could be reused. The telescope was still in his warehouse. He led us past stacked chairs to a shelf near the back. The base had warped along one edge. One support bracket was cracked. The mirror carried a thin scratch, and 2 adjustment pieces were missing. Adam's original notebook was gone, but the telescope was there. Ellis refused payment. He helped us load every piece into my car and apologized. I told him he had bought what he believed was used property. The apology belonged elsewhere. Ben inspected the damage the way Adam used to study a problem before touching it. "We can still fix it," he said. I could have hired someone to rebuild everything. Instead, Ben and I worked beside a volunteer technician from the astronomy club. We replaced the missing hardware, reinforced the cracked support, and straightened what we could without pretending the wood had never bent. The technician offered to sand the base smooth and paint over every repair. Ben shook his head. I wanted to keep the birch panels Adam had cut. He did not want the repaired seam hidden. He chose to use the scratched mirror if it still worked. "I want to know which part Dad made," he said, "which part Mom made, and which part I made." We finished his room one decision at a time. Bun chose deep blue walls, a new star map, a simple wooden bed, and a place for the telescope beside the window. He hung a sign outside the door, "Please knock." One afternoon, I entered carrying clean laundry and forgot. Ben looked up. "Mom, the sign." I stopped, stepped into the hallway, closed the door, and knocked. "Come in," he said. Ben needed to know that even I would ask. Weeks later, I noticed the blue backpack was no longer beside the front door. I found it empty at the bottom of his closet. The photograph, toothbrush, shirt, toy boat, and star notebook had returned to their places. I did not ask when he had unpacked it. The house had finally begun to hold things for him again. Paige gave birth to a daughter in early winter. I sent a box of diapers through Jenna without a note. My conflict had never been with the baby, and a boundary did not require punishing a child for her mother's choices. Paige paid the first restitution installment on time. The second was late, and her probation officer contacted her. By the 3rd month, she had established an automatic transfer. There was no complete transformation. She did not apologize to Ben. She still told relatives I had destroyed the family over furniture. But for the first time, Paige fulfilled an obligation without asking me to rescue her. Susan continued living with Deb. She still believed I had taken everything too far. She was not permitted to see Ben alone. Months later, she came to visit with my approval. She walked down the hallway and stopped outside Ben's room. Then she knocked. Ben did not answer immediately. Susan waited. It was the smallest change she could have made, and perhaps the first honest one. On Ben's 9th birthday, we carried the repaired telescope to a dark sky viewing area outside the city beneath a blanket of cold desert stars. Cold pines scented the open air. The image was not perfect. The scratch created a faint blur at one edge, and the repaired base moved less smoothly than Adam intended. We adjusted the mirror using the measurements Hal had found. Then Saturn entered the eyepiece. Ben stared without speaking. Its rings were small, pale, and unmistakable. "Dad was right," he whispered. "It still works." I knew he was not speaking only about the telescope. I once believed protecting a family meant keeping everyone inside it. Ben taught me that sometimes protection means deciding who must knock, who must wait to be invited, and who no longer gets to take something and call it love. The telescope did not return unchanged. Neither did our family, but the parts that remained true were finally placed together without requiring a child to disappear so adults could have more room. If someone in your family calls it love, when one person is always required to surrender, what would you protect first? Peace or the person being asked to vanish? Share your answer in the comments. Send this story to someone who has been called strong for carrying too much. And subscribe for more stories about betrayal, boundaries, and building a safer home.